and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Grain ships leaving Ukraine face uncertain journey after Russia's withdrawal from deal. Moscow says it was merely informed of the decision to grant safe passage, but grain shipments were agreed to without Russia. And former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi suggests the West should stop weapons aid to end Ukraine conflict. A total of 218 vessels were effectively blocked due to Russia's decision to suspend its participation in the grain export deal. This was reported by Ukraine's infrastructure ministry. Over the weekend, Russia said it suspended participation in the UN-brokered deal to export agricultural produce from Ukrainian ports following attacks on its fleet in Russian-annexed Crimea. Grain ships, including the African Robin, Saint Sophia, Despina, Nikolaus, SK Friendship, and Sea Lock, left Odessa city port and were seen 12 kilometers off its coast yesterday. As Ukraine did not have permits from the scheme's Joint Coordination Center to pass through the safe corridor, the vessels are effectively blocked in their current positions. And that's according to the ministry, which is speaking via the Telegram messaging app. 95 loaded vessels that had left Ukrainian ports were awaiting inspection for shipment to the final consumer, and 101 empty ones awaited inspection at the entrance to Ukrainian ports. Ukraine has said the deal, which unblocked 3 Black Sea ports, has allowed it to export around 9 million tons of agricultural cargo so far. And President Joe Biden cast an early vote in his home state of Delaware, along with his granddaughter Natalie Biden, a first-time voter, talking about the midterm elections in the United States. After voting, Mr. Biden said Paul Pelosi, the husband of U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, is doing better following an attack for which he required surgery. He also addressed Russia's decision to suspend its participation in a UN-brokered grain agreement with Ukraine, calling it outrageous.
You know, talk to them. He seems to be doing a lot better. Looks like he's going to recover fully. And but also, don't know for certain, but it looks like this was intended for Nancy. He kept asking, where's Nancy? Where's Nancy? Well, it's one thing to condemn the violence, but you can't condemn the violence unless you condemn those people who continue to argue the election was not real, that it's being stolen, that all the malarkey that's being put out there to undermine democracy. The talk has to stop. That's the problem. That's the problem. We can't just say, I feel badly about the violence. We condemn it. Condemn what produces the violence. And this talk produces the violence. Clearly outrageous. There's been increased starvation. There's no reason for them to do that. But they're always looking for some rationale to be able to say the reason they're doing something outrageous is because the West made them do it. And it's just not, there's no merit to what they're doing. The UN negotiated that deal, and that should be the end of it.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for strong Western response to Russia's suspension of a Black Sea grain export deal. In a video address, he accused Russia of trying to create an artificial famine in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. In recent weeks, Russia has focused drone and missile attacks on power facilities across the country, destroying more than 30% of generating capacity and prompting widespread restrictions. The president says Ukrainian electricity supplies are recovering after concerted Russian attacks on generating plants, but emergency blackouts may still be needed.
Now we need a strong international response, both at the UN level and at other levels, in particular at the level of the G20. How can Russia be among others in the G20 if it deliberately works to create famine on several continents? This is nonsense. Russia has no place in the G20. Russian terror continues and is very cynical. Sometimes strikes are deliberately repeated after the repair has begun, when the restoration is in progress. Unfortunately, we have victims in repair crews and energy companies. My condolences to the families.
And Russia's defense ministry says British Navy personnel blew up the Nord Stream gas pipelines last month. A claim that London has said was false and designed to distract from Russian military failures in Ukraine. The Russian ministry also said that British specialists from the same unit directed Ukrainian drone attacks on ships from Russia's Black Sea fleet in Crimea earlier at the weekend. The Nord Stream accusations come as amidst the worst crisis in relations between the West and Russia since the depths of the Cold War. Leading NATO member nation, Britain firmly denied the claim that it had targeted critical Russian infrastructure. A spokeswoman for Russian Foreign Ministry, Zakharova, said Moscow will seek reaction from the UN Security Council. Russia, being deeply isolated by Western nations since its February 24th invasion of Ukraine, has previously blamed the West for the explosions that ruptured the Russian-built Nord Stream pipelines on the bed of the Baltic Sea. Let's talk now to Dennis Areva, researcher, Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. Good morning to you, Dennis. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Things seem to be heating up on several fronts, but let's start off with the most perhaps worldwide-ranging impact one, and that is this seeming stoppage of the grain deal, which was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. From the reports, there are several ships stuck in various points. Now, there are those loaded with grain trying to get out of Ukrainian ports. There are those awaiting inspection in Turkey, and there are those that are empty waiting to go into Ukrainian ports to load grain. But Russia says, look, it's withdrawing from this deal, even though the initial 120 days isn't over. What do you make of this?
Well, I think there's a few things we need to discuss in this regard. Firstly, when we say that Russia was withdrawing from the deal, we need to quickly mention what the deal actually entails. And it entails Ukrainian grain being transported through Ukrainian ports to international markets. And we just need to remember that, because Russia has inserted itself into the supply chain and disrupted the supply chain, and then brokered a deal where it became a party to this agreement. So in that regard, the question is to what extent Russia's withdrawal from the deal can actually affect the export from the grain. We saw this morning Turkey has reached an agreement with the UN and Ukraine to start a few experimental shipments of grain from Ukrainian ports. And I cannot see at this point how Russia can disrupt this supply. I mean, it would take an escalation of force essentially for them to disrupt the supply. We also need to remember that at the time when the deal was brokered, Russia was still holding on to the possession of the Snake Island of the coast of Ukraine, and this position had strategic importance for the trade routes in the region. Right now, the Snake Island is in Ukrainian hands, and so, as I said, for Russia to actually disrupt the trade of grain, they would need to massively escalate in this region. I don't see at this moment in time how that can happen. We may see perhaps strikes on civilian infrastructure in Odessa, targeting Odessan ports, or the grain storage facilities, but we'll have to see what will happen there. And just one quick final thing, I think we saw how quickly Russia actually jumped on the opportunity to step away from the deal. And we heard about a month ago, Putin has been complaining about the deal, and he dangled the possibility of actually withdrawing from it. So it may have been a pre-planned thing, and Russia was perhaps just waiting for an opportunity to actually withdraw and use this as another tool in its pressure on Ukraine to essentially cease resisting.
But because this has international implications. One is worried about the potentials for, as you pointed out, escalation of conflict here. If the ships, I mean, are in various points, there are some trying to get out of ports, there are others trying to get in, there are those waiting for inspection. Anyone could attack any of these ships, as we have seen in the past with infrastructure and all of that. And because we have this so-called kamikaze drones that are proved so much effective in this war, perhaps, is there a way, you think, of bringing Russia back into this? Because effectively, you did point out that how Russia can stop this is going to be more difficult militarily, but you didn't say it was impossible. You only said that would mean an escalation of the conflict. Why do you think that that would not be the position of Russia, especially if it's not part of the deal anymore?
Well, we cannot know for sure that this is true, and we could expect realistically that Russia may escalate and actually target even civilian ships, or try to perhaps we may see attacks on civilian ships where Russia would deny its responsibility. I think it is important to know that at this moment in time, I've mentioned a deal that was reached this morning between Turkey, the UN, and Ukraine, was the few test runs of these ships from the Ukrainian ports without Russian consent, and we will see right now how that goes and what will be Russian reaction. I don't think Russia's position in this regard is very strong. I don't think Russia has made its case very well. So obviously, supply disruptions of Ukrainian food will have massive implications for vulnerable communities around the world, including in Africa. And so for that to take place, it would be very difficult, I think, for Russia to justify why it now blocks these ships from exiting ports, or why it would do that. So once again, it's not a guarantee that nothing will happen. We may see Russia attempting to escalate. I think we may also see Russia coming back to negotiations table, depending on these test runs that are being carried out this morning and Russia's reaction. I don't think Russia has a strong case here, and hence I think perhaps we'll see Russia returning to the table.
Let's look at something else. The Russians are accusing the British of being the ones who blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. Now, these pipelines, no one has been able to go down there and actually see the extent of the damage and know what it is that's been used or how this happened or anything, because the Baltic Sea, where the pipelines are located and where you could check where the damage is from, currently is being blocked, I understand, by the countries that run the shoreline there, so no one can go there. So the Russians are saying it's the Brits. The Brits are saying we had nothing to do with it. Nobody can say for certain who is telling the truth. Is that correct?
I guess at this moment in time, we can only speculate. One point, however, is that for a very long time, the access to these pipelines were blocked because Russia kept pumping gas into these destroyed pipes. So the bubbling of the sea that we saw was actually Russia continuing to pump gas into them. So obviously, as long as Russia continued this, it was impossible to access this infrastructure. We have to wait and see for the investigation. Of course, even after the investigation has been finished, I think Russia will not accept the outcomes of it. I think they will stick with their narrative. I think in this regard, one very short, brief, and interesting thing to point out is that what happened to these pipelines is very coincidental, because under the agreement that Russia had with the European Union, with European countries, the agreement speculated that for any delay in supplying of gas, Russia would have to compensate its partners in Europe. And as we know, when the war started, Russia started making excuses of why they could no longer supply gas through Nord Stream 1, and Europeans refused to operationalize Nord Stream 2, which was planned to take place, I think, in the spring of 2022. So essentially, Russia had a very troubling case on its hands where it had to potentially pay European countries billions in money that because of the delay in supply of gas. So this explosion was very, I would say, favorable for Russia, because now Russia has an actual reason why they can no longer supply gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And hence, perhaps they have a case of why they can avoid paying the fee that they had to pay otherwise. But other than that, we'll have to wait and see what the outcomes of official investigation is, and see. But I'm assuming that Russia will not accept this investigation.
I can't let you go without asking about the battle for Kherson, which everyone has been expecting for quite a while. It hasn't quite happened yet. The Russians say that they have evacuated virtually the entire civilian population of Kherson. Where to remains problematic because they say that the Ukrainians intend to target the city, and in taking it might make use of a dirty bomb, which is making reference to some level of nuclear material and all of that. With the city now empty, do you think that this is fair game? The Ukrainians can go all out. The Russians can also go all out.
Well, that's a lot to unpack there. Of course, I think first of all, I don't foresee Ukraine using any sort of kind of dirty bomb against sort of its own cities. As far as Ukraine is concerned, this territory is part of Ukraine, and these are Ukrainian civilians. And since, of course, a use of dirty bomb that would affect a lot of civilian population defies the purpose, because Ukraine is attempting to liberate these cities. Furthermore, I think Russia, despite Russian claims and the phone calls that were made by the Minister of Defense of Russia to his counterparts, my understanding is that Russia failed to produce any evidence in the closed UN discussions they had about the dirty bomb, and hence we've seen no further proof from the Russian side. With that being said, I think what we're seeing right now, I think there's definitely an attempt to create a picture of Russia preparing for the war and evacuation of civilians and evacuation of, among other things, we've seen evacuation of statues and museums, etc. However, I think what we obviously have to remember also that Kherson is the biggest city that Russia has occupied since the start of the war, and has strategic value for Russia, not just because basically symbolic value, but also because the control of Kherson region and Kherson specifically allows Russia to continue to pump water into Crimea, which was a major issue for them as well. They would definitely fight, but the extent to which we will see an outright war is questionable. I mean, up to this point, Ukraine has avoided any major battles for cities. We've seen before in the Kharkiv region, where cities were taken not by brute force indirectly, but by encircling them and cutting them off and forcing Russian forces to withdraw. So we may see a very similar strategy playing out in this regard. Certainly, we'll just have to wait and see. Perhaps Russia may actually attempt to stage a final stand, sort of the way Ukrainian forces did in Mariupol. I think one quick final point on that regard is that when it comes to Kherson, we're also seeing a lot of newly conscripted soldiers being put in the front lines, and perhaps this is one weakness that Russia may regret. We know from the recent Insider investigation, and Insider is a Russian opposition journal, newspaper. We know that the average lifespan of a newly conscripted soldier on the front line is somewhere between 7 to 10 days. So these conscripts are not well trained, they're not well equipped, and what we may see in the Kherson region, a collapse of a front line, the way we saw it in Kharkiv earlier this year, and that will obviously change the battle. But if Russia can maintain the line and fortify the city, we may see a battle for the city. And the way it will play out is difficult to predict, but I doubt that Ukraine will outright level or destroy the city, given that the attempt is to liberate the city, not to not so much to push Russians out, but to liberate and free the people.
Indeed. Dennis Raver, thank you so much for your time and perspective this morning. Of course, we'll be returning to you in the not too distant future to update ourselves or what is really happening there. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, Russia alleges drones targeting ships contain Canadian-made parts. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. A dozen vessels carrying Ukrainian grain were cleared to leave Turkish ports today, while the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul agreed on a plan to inspect a further 30 ships in spite of Moscow's decision to suspend its participation in the agreement, which ensured the safety of Kiev's exports via the Black Sea. In a statement, the JCC says the Ukrainian side agreed to a proposal that the Turkish and United Nations delegations provide tomorrow 10 inspection teams aimed to inspect 40 outbound vessels without the participation of Russian inspectors. It added that the Russian delegation was informed of both plans, noting that as per JCC procedures, all participants coordinate with their respective military and other relevant authorities to ensure the safe passage of the vessels. Moscow has yet to issue an official statement, but a source cited by RIA Novosti claimed that the Russian has had no obligations under any decisions taken without them. However, according to the JCC, the Russian delegation expressed its readiness to continue the dialogue and cooperate remotely on issues that require immediate decisions. Italy's former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is saying Western nations should stop supplying Ukraine with weapons if they want a peaceful solution to the conflict between Kiev and Moscow. Over the weekend, Mr. Berlusconi said that the prospect of receiving no military aid but a large reconstruction fund could convince Kiev to agree to talks with Moscow. According to Mr. Berlusconi, Mr. Zelensky would only agree to any sort of a deal with Moscow if Ukraine realizes at some point that it can no longer count on weapons and aid at the same time. Instead, the West could offer Kiev hundreds of billions of dollars for reconstruction as a stimulus to enter the negotiations, according to Mr. Berlusconi. The 86-year-old former prime minister, who now leads the Forza Italia party, also believes Ukraine should recognize Crimea as Russian territory, according to Ra Republican newspaper, which published excerpts from his interview with Vesper. A new referendum that would involve Western observers should also be held in Donbass to determine its fate. The former premier went on to call Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, a man of peace. Mr. Berlusconi admitted he tried to reach out to Mr. Putin when the conflict between Moscow and Kiev broke out in late February, but could not get in touch with him by phone. Russia's Navy commander-in-chief has announced that it is conducting a trial run of a new strategic nuclear submarine at a time of heightened tensions with the West. The Navy chief said the submarine was built at the Sevmash Enterprise, Russia's largest shipbuilding facility in the northern city of Severodvinsk. The Generalissimo Suvorov is the sixth vessel of Russia's fourth-generation ballistic missile submarine and the second mass-produced ship of the upgraded Boria A class. Each vessel can carry up to 16 Bolivar-class submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which could be armed with nuclear warheads. The boat was named after the 18th century general Alexander Suvorov, who is considered one of the greatest military commanders in Russian history. Yevmenov went on to say that the Russian Navy has been reinforced by other state-of-the-art new ships, including the UFA diesel-electric submarine, which has successfully passed official testing. The vessel, which is intended for the Russian Pacific Fleet, is expected to be formally accepted by the Navy next month. Submarines of this type are armed with Caliber cruise missiles. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said he hopes U.S. President Joe Biden has the wisdom to deal with a global confrontation similar to the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, referencing the war on Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has triggered the biggest hostilities between Moscow and the West since the Cuban crisis, when the Soviet Union and the United States came close to nuclear war. At the time, U.S. President John F. Kennedy discovered that Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had deployed nuclear missiles on Cuba after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, a U.S.-backed coup attempt by Cuban exiles to overthrow the communist leadership of Fidel Castro. In October 1962, a Soviet submarine captain wanted to launch a nuclear weapon after the U.S. Navy dropped depth charges around the submarine. But later that day, President Kennedy secretly agreed to remove all U.S. missiles from Turkey in exchange for Mr. Khrushchev removing the same from Cuba. The crisis was diffused, though it became a symbol of the perils of superpower rivalry in the Cold War. Let's talk now to Major General Pat Arkham, a military strategist and consultant, joins us from our Abuja studios. Good morning to you, General Arkham. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Larry.
Is this war on Ukraine possible to link to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962? Are there any parallels?
Not much. Not much, because the world has changed drastically. To be even talking about nuclear weapons now it looks very abnormal to those of us who have been involved in military conflicts and in military studies. The whole concept of having nuclear weapons was to prevent superpowers with nuclear weapons from going to war. We were talking about mutually assured destruction, where you just destroy each other. So in the 21st century, to be talking about nuclear weapons looks very, very abnormal and very disconcerting. So I think the parallels are not too much there. But again, we cannot rule out the danger of playing around with nuclear weapons and just throwing off phrases like that. Mistakes are normally made in war, and mistakes can be made. But I don't think those distinct those similarities are strong enough to draw as an example. So basically, I would say no.
Let's come to the battlefield itself. The Russians say they have evacuated the civilian population of Kherson, which they expect to be the next big battle in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have made no secret of the fact that they would like to take the city back, it being the biggest city under Russian occupation. But the whole idea, again, going back to the issue of nuclear weapons, that there's a dirty bomb somewhere in the mix. The Russians are saying the Ukrainians could use it. The Ukrainians are saying the Russians are saying that because they intend to use it. So again, we're back to the issue of nuclear weapons. But in terms of strategic military advantage, is this a place that the Russians must continue to hold if their military position in Ukraine is to be standing?
Yes. Yes, because it's very strategic. It's one of the biggest cities that they captured at the onset of the war. And apart from that, they've moved in about 1,000 new soldiers. So that means it's of strategic value, strategic and operational value. But the Ukrainians are not biting it. They are not biting the bait. They feel that the signals are too loud. You are shouting, you have withdrawn, you have evacuated, you have even removed the body of a general that is respected, that was buried in the region. You've removed him. They are too loud with the signals that they are telegraphing very loudly that we have removed everybody. We are virtually prepared to defend, but not necessarily to hold it, that we can actually withdraw. So the Ukrainians have gotten the signals that, look, a trap is being set for us to enter into. And like the other guests had earlier signaled, Ukraine has not been fond of fighting in major cities like that. They do some tactical maneuvers and put pressure on Russians to withdraw. So yeah, Ukraine has come up clearly to say we are not entering into the city yet. We're not taking Kherson yet. We're not going to insert our troops into. We're not going to get into it to begin to fight, because Russia has actually prepared defenses, fortified defenses, moved in more troops, moved in equipment. So it will be a trap of some sort, and Ukraine is not biting it.
General Akem, there are still several levels for this battle to go. Earlier on, while you were speaking, the visuals of Russia's latest nuclear submarine were on the screen, and we did talk about it earlier on. This submarine is to be pressed into action now, and it is capable of carrying nuclear warheads, cruise missiles. There's another submarine that is going to go into action next month. Again, that one is armed to carry cruise missiles as well, which can be tipped with nuclear warheads. Russia is trying to pass a message here that should it feel, perhaps, that if things are not going its way, it still has so much to dig into and use, which the Ukrainians do not.
Okay, you see, you must realize that Putin is a rational actor. Putin is rational. He's intelligent. You can't rule for that long without some certain level of mental acuity and intelligence. The war has not gone the way it was envisaged to go. The design for this war was for it to end within a matter of days or at most weeks. It has not gone that way. You captured some areas, some of the areas you captured have been taken back. You are now bombing civilian infrastructure, critical infrastructure, which are prohibited by the additional protocol, especially Article 52, that says you should not attack things that are not connected directly to battle, civilian infrastructure. You are now bombing them. When you do that, you reduce yourself in the eyes of the international community. So what next do? You need to show that I have something that I can also introduce that is strategic, that is heavy. And so if you have nuclear weapons, you start talking about them, you start signaling that you can use them, and perhaps you hope that people will take you very seriously, that you can actually use them. The danger in that is that you may be playing around with that, and then it can escalate and mistakes can be made. But on the surface, Putin will not just simply deploy nuclear weapons. Look at it this way. America is presently trying to move nuclear weapons to station them in Europe. And America has submarines that have nuclear weapons. Not only America, Britain has nuclear weapons. France has nuclear weapons. So you are talking about NATO. You are going to use those things. They may escalate to the extent that they get into any of the NATO nations. And then you invite NATO indirectly. And they have nuclear weapons. So when you are talking about nuclear weapons, they are basically strategic weapons meant for deterrence. In fact, at a certain point in time, it was even said that democracies do not go to war. It was calculated that there will be discussions and that war will not result as a result of those discussions. So to be talking about nuclear weapons, now, yeah, you can show them off that you have them, but I don't think that Putin will be so irrational to deploy them. But beyond that, presidents give orders for nuclear weapons to be deployed. Generals execute them. I don't think there is a living general who will casually throw nuclear weapons, knowing that there will be a response. And the response could wipe out the whole nation. So we're talking about something that we shouldn't even be talking about at all. I think it doesn't sound well, it doesn't look well, it doesn't make Putin look strong to be fighting a small nation and talking casually about nuclear weapons. It doesn't look nice at all. It doesn't make him look strong. It makes you look very weak. It makes you look like you have nothing else to offer. I mean, if you went to war with a small nation and you calculated that you're going to defeat them within a short while, now you are deploying kamikaze drones to cause panic, widespread panic and all that. And then the more you do that, the more you get the nation against you, because look, cold is coming, winter is coming, critical infrastructure has been destroyed, electrical grids. Ukraine has lost about 40% of its capacity. People are going to spend winter in cold, and then they will have no food. They are using candles to warm food now. When you do that, you are virtually mobilizing the whole populace against you. So I think there have been a lot of miscalculations. Somebody is not thinking straight. So to be talking casually about nuclear weapons is not looking nice.
The one that would affect us, and when I say us, I mean Nigeria and other countries in Nigeria's bracket, is this UN grain deal, which was negotiated sometime in July to allow a great deal of grain to come out of Ukraine, which was one of, up until that time, most people did not know that Ukraine was so important to grains worldwide. But now the Russians say they've pulled out of this deal, creating another kind of crisis or emergency. But as my last guest said, Turkey and the United Nations have reached a deal with Ukraine, leaving out the Russians to see how this can be continued. Is this not a very dangerous game, considering that those ships, which are essentially civilian ships, could be the subject of rogue attacks or even formal attacks by the Russians?
Yeah, very true. Ukraine supplies, last year, Ukraine's supply of grains to the world was 10%. So it's huge. One single nation, 10%, very huge. And most of it comes to poor nations, Africa, even though Russia is saying that the Western world is taking the grains, that is not coming to poor nations. So, yeah, Turkey and UN are trying to work out a deal. But beyond that, yesterday, one Lithuanian officer, a senior official, government official, hinted that it will even be possible to have military forces escort the grains. So it's getting as dangerous as that. And I think that from the Russian perspective, you are fighting a war of this nature. You must leave some able room to maneuver, to keep friends, to have allies that you can use. When you cut off grains that are coming to African nations, cut off grains going to poor, hungry nations, when you cut off power supply to the extent that Ukrainians who are refugees who are trying to come back have been told to stay back, when you do all that, you end up with very few friends. So it's not surprising that they're now looking to Saudi Arabia and Iran as their major allies around the world. When you do that, you leave yourself exposed to some countermeasures that will be very devastating on your nation. So we'll see how it plays out. But, you know, it's very dangerous because Russia can do a whole range of things. They can use drones and deny that they were not the ones that deployed them. So I'll see how that will pan out, but it's dangerous. Because the UN is involved and Turkey is involved, Turkey plays a certain role. They talk to Russia, they look friendly. They also do some things because they belong to NATO. So the whole range of things that are going on, we'll see how they pan out. But again, we're playing, the dangerous games are being played. If I were advising the Russian president, I would have said, leave the grains, let them be going. But he's thinking that Ukraine is making money from the grains, sale of grains. And, you know, you would like to starve them of funds, but they're making, so, yeah, if I were Russia, I would play the long game because, see, some emerging trends are pointing to the fact that it may be difficult if the Republicans take over Congress. It may be difficult for U.S. to continue to supply, to be involved at the level they are involved now, that it may be downgraded. Because we have heard even Kevin McCarthy, who may become speaker if they win the elections, saying that it will not be a blank check again. Just last week, a congressman by the name of Paul Gosa said he was inviting President Zelensky and Putin to come for a peace deal, as ridiculous as that may sound. The liberal wing of the Democratic Party, headed by Pramila, one Pramila, I can't remember the surname, came out and wrote a letter that was given to President Biden to begin to explore ways to end the conflict. So when those cracks are emerging, if from a Russian perspective, it will be better to wait out without escalating further, to wait out to see whether you can actually begin to exploit those cracks that are emerging. To get to the level where you are now starving a certain population of the world doesn't look like a winning hand to me.
Indeed. Well, as you said, quite a lot of dangerous games being played here, General, and of course you know better than most what the consequences of actions like this could be. Major General Pat Akem, thank you so much for your time this morning and for your perspective. We'll be back with you not too long in the future, I'm sure. Thank you. Kherson's world's longest ever passenger train, consisting of 100 cars to celebrate 175 years of rail transport. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Russia's defense ministry is saying the drones used to attack Russian ships in the Black Sea in Crimea were equipped with Canadian-made parts used in the navigation systems. It said 16 Ukrainian drones attacked the fleet in the Black Sea in the annexed Crimean Peninsula, an attack which it, quote, repelled in the Bay of Sevastopol. According to the Russian military, it conducted an examination of Canadian-made navigation modules found in the shot-down unmanned aerial vehicles. According to results of the information recovered from the navigation receiver's memory, it was established that the launch of maritime drones was carried out from the coast near the city of Odessa. The drones reportedly moved along the grain corridor safe zone before changing course to head for Russia's naval base in the largest city on the Crimean Peninsula, Sevastopol. The drones, according to the defense ministry, may have been launched from aboard one of the civilian ships chartered by Kiev or its Western masters for the export of agricultural products from the seaports of Ukraine. And it is with that theme that we'll stay as we talk to Laddie Williams. Morning, Laddie. Morning. The Russians, as we were saying last week, have halted this grain deal, or they have halted their participation in the grain deal.
Yeah, they didn't even wait.
The markets are...
Yeah, so, you know, we enjoyed, you know, the drop in wheat prices, you know, when they, you know, struck that landmark deal for the grains. But now, with this, we already had, you know, premonitions.
Yeah, that this was coming.
That this was actually going to happen.
That over and over again.
Yeah, so it's finally come to be now, and obviously we know the markets are going to react, and what we've been trying to avoid, you know, this surging food prices, that's actually going to happen now, because as long as this deal is off, there's going to be issues, and it remains to be seen what Russia is going to do to actually, you know, show
enforce its non-participation.
Their non-participation. So at the end of the day, the markets are waiting for prices to actually react, and we're already seeing that, you know, happen with the wheat futures already this morning.
Now, with or without the grain exports or the deal, the recession fears have always been stalking Europe, and that's continuing in spite of Germany's surprising growth.
Yeah,
Germany is the strongest economy in Europe.
Yeah.
What's driving that?
We saw the Q3 GDP there. Quite unexpected, but 0.3% uptick there. But we know Germany have had issues, you know, obviously with energy prices, which has stoked inflation. But the inflation issues are still there. But, you know, thankfully they were able to store up gas, you know, for the winter, and they were also able to, you know, keep the supply and energy prices down, you know, momentarily before, you know, Russia actually shut down, you know, gas supplies to Germany. So even though they're not still out of the woods, even though we saw this impressive Q3, economists are still forecasting Q4
will really be dismal.
The game changer for them.
All right, then. Laddie, of course, will have details of this and others and Business Morning and, of course, Business Incorporated together with the crew, Ini, John McQuarrie, and others after this. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
Take a quick look at the sports. Russian Olympic Committee President Stanislav Pozhniakov has moved closer to re-election in December after being nominated by the Russian Athletics Federation. Mr. Pozhniakov was elected to succeed Alexander Zhukov in 2018 and has been at the helm during a period of significant changes to Russia's standing within global sport. The country held the FIFA World Cup at the start of his tenure, but competed at the Tokyo 2020 and Beijing 2022 Olympic Games without its flag under the neutral ROC banner due to sanctions imposed after the Russian anti-doping agency was declared non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code in December of 2019. The sanctions are due to remain in place until December the 16th. The ROC have avoided direct sanctions from the IOC, allowing both to attend the Association of National Olympic Committees General Assembly in Seoul earlier this month. Mr. Potiakov has been a critic of the Olympic movement's response to the war in Ukraine and has suggested that it is an honorable duty for Russian athletes to fight in the conflict. And Russian tennis star Daniil Medvedev is excited with his second title of the year after winning the Vienna Open. The world number 4 came from a set down to beat Denis Shapovalov 4-6, 6-3, 6-2. The victory ensures the Russian will play in the ATP finals next month after going for glory at the Paris Masters, the tournament he won in 2020, where he entered at the 4th seed.
Yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, everything was working this week, and this match was the best of the week because Dennis was playing unreal till probably like 4-3 in the second set. He dropped his level maybe just by 2%, and I managed to use it, and that's you know, that's the best victories, when you know that your opponent was on top of you, but you tried to stay there, you tried to do what you can, and yeah, amazing and really happy. Your winner, Daniil Medvedev!
Finally on the program, high in the Swiss Alps, the St. Moritz region continued its long tradition of expanding the limits of what is possible with an epic world record attempt, not on snow or ice, but on rails. To celebrate the 175th anniversary of Switzerland's first railway, the country's rail industry came together to run the world's longest ever passenger train, 100 cars, 2,990 tons, and almost 2 kilometers long. Formed of 25 new Capricorn electric trains, the record-breaking 1,906-meter train took almost an hour to cover around 25 kilometers over the spectacular UNESCO World Heritage Albula line from Preda to Alvenio in eastern Switzerland. The region made its name as a place for pushing the boundaries of winter sport. By the time it hosted the second Winter Olympic Games in 1928, its reputation as a playground for wealthy adventurers was already very well established. The Albula line is famous for its endless sloping curves and steep descents. A world-renowned masterpiece of civil engineering, the 62-kilometer line between Thusis and St. Moritz took just 5 years to build, despite requiring 55 bridges and 39 tunnels. Prior to its completion in July of 1904, visitors faced a risky 14-hour journey over rough tracks in horse-drawn carriages or sleighs. Even in the throes of war and conflict, there are those who are still pushing the boundaries of humanity's achievements. That's where we end the program this Monday. Thanks for being with us. My name is Vladi Akbari. Do have yourselves a wonderful week ahead.